Then once again, welcome everyone to our new webinar series. Today's webinar is led by the wonderful Mike Clargo. We are really happy to have you here today. And he's an expert in remote meetings. And we had already a wonderful session this morning. And hopefully we will enlighten you about how to engage people within virtual meetings.
Okay, I noticed that not everybody is on the concept board at the moment. Can you post the link to the concept board in the chat window,
Of
Simona,
course.
and then people can join that, because a lot of what we're taking place will actually take place on the concept board, which we're sharing so that you can see it in Zoom, but actually we want you to join in. That's part of the approach that we're trying to follow here. So let's kick off. And okay, so I've split meetings up into 6 areas, each of which is important to get the right degree of participation. The top 2 areas illustrated here are to do with drawing the right people into the right space at the right time with the right attitudes, the who, where, and the when, and how you do that in a way that will put them in the best place to participate effectively. And the other side of it is the alignment, the objectives of the meeting, and how we engage people with those objectives in order that they are bought into the what we're going to do and the why we're going to do it. And that's basically starting off the meeting to get participation there. Then there's what you do within the meeting, starting off with activity, which is how we do our thinking in a way that isn't just talking to people or presentations. How we maintain people's attention through that, through the relationships they have with each other, and how we pull that into a clear set of actions at the end so that people really feel that the meeting's been worthwhile and is leading to something really productive. And finally, we won't get that right every time. In fact, we won't do it right on the first time, we won't do it right on the 100th time. But if we're learning all the time through assessment about what we can improve within the meeting, that will help us to get better participation as we go. Just want to introduce some health warnings before we start. The first is that this is not actually a meeting. It's an experiential event where we will be moving very, very quick through a whole number of ideas and concepts and a chance to participate in those, with the intention that hopefully you will get new ideas through all of that. And at the end of the meeting, I will take you to a web page where there's loads of free resources for you to recreate that for yourself. My goal is that at the end of this, you will be excited by some of the things in here and that you will want to take that forward, and you'll be using the free resources to enable that to happen. So it's more experiential than meeting. What I would ask is, in order to keep the pace up, when you're asked to contribute, don't worry about the quality of what you're contributing. Start with your first idea, because it's not so much that all these things have to be drawn together. It's more about seeing how that works and what emerges from it. Not everything we do will appeal to everybody here. But my hope is that there will be something that appeals to everybody, and that's what you'll pick up on first and run with. So if there's things that don't appeal to you, don't worry about it. You don't have to use it. So that's where we're kicking off from. Is that okay in terms of health warnings for everybody? Quick nod will help. Wonderful. Okay, so let's then move on from this to look at the overall picture. I'm going to basically move into these 6 areas and deal with each of those 6 A's in order, starting off with the first one, which is assembly. And in order to assemble you as a group with this, what I'd like you to do is, I'm moving the arrow underneath the post-it note that you can see on your screen there. And I'd like you, if you'd be so kind, to click on a post-it note and you can pick whatever color you wish and then stick it in the register with your name. I only want you to do this because we're going to be using post-it notes a number of times. So I want you to get practiced with doing this bit of it. And it also gives us a register of everybody who's been here. So just feel free to grab a post-it note, drop it in the register, and leave us your name. That's great. Good, it seems that everybody can do that effectively. And what I'd like you to do next is, if you'd be so kind, I'd like you to take your cursors, and with your cursors, I'd like you to place them on the blob tree. Now, the blob tree is designed to reflect feelings, how people feel as they approach the meeting. So I'd like you to find a shape on the blob tree that reflects how you're feeling as you approach this meeting, and just put your cursor pointing at it so that we can get a sense of where everybody is as they come into the meeting. And this is a very good check-in tool. Blob trees are available very inexpensively from the people who create blob trees, but they're really good to start discussion off with people as they arrive to understand where everybody's coming from. So I just want to check, I mean, you're all pointing to different blobs, as it were, and I want to ask the question, is it usual for people to attend meetings in a mixture of emotional states? And just put your cursor over on this yes/no side of thing, depending on whether you think it is usual that we all come at meetings differently or no. Yeah, I think we're pretty unanimous that it's common. You know, the baggage we bring into the meeting can be because we were upset just before, we've got something really important on our mind, and all of those sorts of things. But actually, the way we attend a meeting can make a big difference in terms of how we're ready for the meeting. So I'm going to cover in assembly a number of things: the mental preparation, the physical preparation, the room, and how we can work with those. The first thing I want to focus on is the fact that brain chemistry can make a big difference in terms of how we feel in the meeting and what we do about it. So basically, there are three chemicals that are really helpful to having a mind that's creative, curious, doing the right things, and constructive around that. And those three chemicals are serotonin, which help with calmness and confidence; dopamine, that energizes us and gives us motivation, it's a sort of reward drug; and oxytocin, that they call the love drug, that helps build trust between people. And you can imagine that if you had a room full of people who were calm but motivated and trusting one another, you're going to get a much better product out at the end of the day than if you haven't. And the interesting thing about these three things is motivation and energy and the confidence lead to creativity, the energy and trust leads to belonging, and the confidence and the trust leads to courage, and they feed out into a reward, a sense of reward for success, curiosity and building on people's ideas, and care and compassion, which in turn reinforce these chemicals that are happening in our brains. So if we can start off a meeting in the right way, and if the behaviors of everybody else in the meeting are in the right way, it will help us to maintain a chemistry in our mind that's going to work best for us in the meeting. Moving on from there, there's the physical preparation. And quite often we find that people turn up to meetings and they are not properly prepared for those meetings. And a lot of the reason for that is because it's not visible that they're not prepared for the meetings. They bluff their way through what they've done. This sort of check-in just allows people to place their cursor on this Venn diagram as to what they've done in preparation for the meeting. So if you place your cursor right in the middle of these three things, then you're saying, I've done all the actions, done the pre-reading, done the preparation. Of course, if you'd missed out on the actions, you'd put your cursor here. And the intention isn't actually to expose anybody or criticize them, it's just to make it visible. And you don't have to say anything to anybody, but the next meeting, they know you're going to do the same thing again. And it does make us take a little bit more responsibility for being professional as we approach meetings. So that can really help in terms of the quality of the meeting as you set out. And the third thing is that even though we're in a virtual environment, it's really important to make the environment interesting for people. If we can create an ambience in the space that we're working in, and you can see I've used loads of colors here and rounded shapes and things like that, but if we can create an ambience that attracts people into the meeting, it's going to be a lot more effective to keep them engaged and focused on what we're doing. And Concept Board has a number of templates, including this one that was created to help people through meetings with all the key elements there so that people can see and keep track of all the things they've decided and want to engage with the next piece of the template. All of these things, as I said, we've got links for them at the end, so don't bother with the links at the moment. You'll have them all when we finish. What I'd like to do is I talked a bit earlier about this whole idea of this chemistry that we talked about here. And I'd like to move on from that to try an exercise in terms of meditation. It's only a simple one. It's very short. It's about 2 minutes long. But if you'd mind moving your cursors off the page so that I can read it to you, what I'm going to ask you to do is follow this exercise and see how you feel at the end of it, bearing in mind it's a fairly short one. So if you'd be so kind, could I ask you to close your eyes? Just need to move this thing. Somebody's put a comment down there. Please close your eyes and sit square with your limbs uncrossed, with your arms by your side, with your hands resting on your lap, and your feet placed squarely on the floor. Adjust your position slightly if needs be to ensure you're sitting comfortably. And as you allow your body to become still, bring your attention to the fact that you are breathing and become aware of the movement of your breath as it comes into your body and as it leaves your body, not manipulating the breath in any way or trying to change it, simply being aware of it and of the feelings associated with breathing, sensing the breath deep down inside of you. Feeling the abdomen as it expands gently on the in-breath and as it falls back towards your spine on the out-breath. Being totally here in each moment, with each breath, not trying to do anything, not trying to get anywhere, simply being with your breath. And now, if you gently move your attention back into this meeting and what it means for you, I'd like you to imagine the best that it could be. Imagine yourself relaxed and curious, absorbing and delivering the best that can be. And I'd ask you now to gradually open your eyes and return to us and allow the benefits of this practice to expand into your intentions for how you want to approach the rest of this session. My hope is that you can sense in yourself a slightly different feeling now than you had 3 minutes ago. What I'd like to ask you in terms of your thoughts is if everybody were able to feel the way you do now within 3 minutes of arriving at each meeting, and we're able to maintain that feeling, would those 3 minutes be a worthwhile investment of time? And I can see lots of you feel that it would be a worthwhile investment. So it's just something to think about for your own meetings, that maybe you create that space at the start for people to actually arrive, for people to assemble themselves with the best mindset that they can have there. Now I'm going to move off of assembly and move on to the area of alignment, which, as I said, was the what and the why, getting people to agree with the objectives of the meeting. And even though this is an experience, I have created objectives for it. And what I hope to do for you through this process is to engage ourselves in a vision of what we mean by better remote meetings and what the value of those better remote meetings would be to us, both theoretically as I run through and ramble on at you, and experientially as you engage with the various ideas that we do it. Second thing is, I want you to understand the 6 principles behind effective participative remote meetings, those 6 A's we started with, and why those things are important. And the third thing is, I'd like for us to be able to equip ourselves with ideas and the resources we can use immediately to begin to put these ideas and improve our own meetings. So that's my goal for it. But what I want you to think about is, what's your goal for it? So that's what we're going to cover, or what I'm intending to cover. What I'd like you to do, partly based on what you were thinking about the best this could be, and partly based on any other thoughts you have, just grab a Post-it note and stick it in the area off to the right, and put on that Post-it note what you would most like to have delivered to you or delivered to yourself as a result of this hour. So if you
Mike,
have
may I
that,
quickly say something?
please.
I can see that not everyone is on the board, so I like to ask everyone to just click on the link that we shared in the chat, and then everyone can participate on the board. Also be aware that Mike is sharing his screen. It looks exactly the same like the concept board, just you can't do anything interactive. So just be aware that there might be a second tab open where you can just participate in the whole thing. So
Yeah.
amazing, there are people coming on the board. Welcome.
Wonderful. Welcome. Yes, so if you could put down on a Post-it note in the board your thoughts about what you would most like to have delivered to you. And I'm going to stop moderating so you can zoom in and see what other people want to do. Just put anything down here. As I said, we won't spend too long on this, but just enable yourself to capture what you want out of this. Okay, so lots of thoughts and ideas going down there, some interestingly covering each other. I notice somebody's using comments for it, which is fine, but the Post-it note is if you look on the screen where I'm pointing at, it's the actual Post-it note shape beside comment, not comment itself for that. I'm going
Mike?
to, yeah.
Sorry. We also received a message in the chat asking if we could remove the mouse cursors from the content.
Yeah.
Since we need the mouse cursors for all of this, we could maybe ask everyone if they can just move it slightly away when you're moderating, because everyone will follow automatically, and then just like move it away from the content so everyone can see everything.
Yeah.
In general, people, you can just turn off all mouse cursors so you will not be distracted, but for this exercise we would need the mouse cursors turned on.
We do. Okay, but if you click off the Post-it notes now, then all of those comments should be in there somewhere. Okay, I'm going to start moderating again. I'd like you to think about how you feel now you've put your idea about what you want out of the meeting. Because what I want to talk to you about is that a lot of meetings start off with objectives and agenda. It gets shared ideally with you when the meeting invite's there. but the opportunity for people to think about what they personally want out of the meeting makes a difference to the ownership that they have for the way that the meeting's going to take place. So it's a good thing to cover something like, what do you want out of the meeting, or what are your hopes and concerns? And it doesn't take long in a virtual meeting for people to put those down on post-it notes so that the facilitator can get some sort of idea of where people are coming from, and also know that they're going to be working with him or her to make it a success. And if we can get that buy-in, what we're aiming to actually try and achieve here is this symbiosis of the way a meeting should take place. I mean, a meeting takes place in a context of shared values and beliefs, and people bring to it the knowledge and skills that they've got. And the idea is that meetings should help pull those together into context, develop focus in it, enable people to explore the issues and arrive at decisions, but in a way that builds commitment, that people are going to deliver something practical and valuable at the end of it. But that's not the end of the story, because the very process of following this also contributes back into the group's collective values and beliefs, and also back into the knowledge and skills. So meetings have potential not just to deliver performance, but also to deliver development and potential in the people who are attending the meeting, if we get it right. And around that, I have this picture of what an ideal meeting should be like. I mean, a lot of people don't really like meetings, but to me, meetings that are done properly should be the highlight of the working day, because if you think about it, it draws in, and I'm looking at these green arrows to start with, it draws into the people who are in the meeting the support that they need to do their work. It brings in acceptance for the fact of who they are and what they're trying to do. It brings in encouragement for the things that they've attempted. It's a source of resources from other people helping them. There's a sense of family in it. And actually, for the things you've been successful on, it's a source of recognition, a place to be recognized for what you've done. Equally, it's a place where you can put out creative ideas, where we can be creative in ourselves, where we can move forward the solutions we've got in mind, where we can generate energy and fun that makes it worthwhile to be at work, and where we can build commitment and develop our own commitment to a shared goal. And of course, around all of that, if I go to the blue ones, this helps with the belief we have, the confidence that we feel in ourselves and each other, with the enthusiasm to be at work and doing these projects, and with the dreams we have for our working lives. And meetings provide a basis of doing this better than any other activity we do at work, if only we can get it right. So that's really what I wanted to cover there. I would just like to ask a question. So just put your cursors down here in a second. What proportion of your meetings feel that way to you? Could you move your cursor over this number line down here as to what proportion of your meetings feel that way? Rob, you're a blessed person. And you, Claire. Okay, so around 50%, which isn't bad going. It's very good. I did a survey some time ago of senior executives, about 7 years ago now, about how they spend their time in meetings, and the proportion of meeting time that they spent actually leading or attending the meetings, and how much was pre-work and travel. And it ended up as more than half of their diaries back then, meaning that they had less than half of their diary time for work outside of meetings. The interesting thing when I spoke to them about how much of that time was wasted in re-going over old actions, chasing up people because they hadn't done things, redoing the pre-reading because not everybody had prepared, was about 50% of that time, which is a huge amount of time for a senior executive to actually have lost in that way. So getting meetings right not only has a way of empowering people, but it's also got the potential to really pull some value out of the organization and give you, well, effectively another 50% of your executive back to focus on strategy and things like that. So I want to move on now from that idea of the context of meeting to think what takes place in a meeting. And when somebody uses the word meeting, what visual image most readily comes to mind? And I'd like you to take a post-it note and stick it down in this space below, in terms of, if you can look in your mind when I use the word meeting, what exactly is the picture you have there? Just stick it down on a post-it note and whack it on this bit of the page. And once you've typed it, just move your cursor away and click somewhere else on the page. Some good ones coming up there. Thank you. The interesting thing is that meeting is a verb, but we tend to see it as a noun. Our minds are so used to the way we conventionally meet that we actually end up thinking in a way that that is a meeting. It's in that form, but it doesn't need to be in that form. And the interesting thing about that form is it began hundreds of years ago when people needed to control people. Meetings in terms of their basic form have not changed over centuries. And people's concern about online meetings is that engagement and participation are more difficult to achieve. Our experience tells us that people in virtual meetings are not fully engaged. They multitask, drift off to do other things, half listen, get bored, or they get technology problems, join late, have poor connections, can't hear, get frustrated. But many of these problems are the result of trying to put an old process into new technology. We subconsciously seek to replicate a group of people sat around a table without questioning if this is the best way to use new technology to participate and engage people. So in this section, we're going to look a bit more at the range of activities that we could do if we weren't just sitting around the table. What could we do in that space? And so I'm going to move on here to look at activity. And what we're going to do in this is actually look at some of the basic tools you could use, look at a source of the sheer volume of tools that now exist to do things differently. And by the way, I'm not talking here about the technology tools. I mean, those you can find like Concept Board or Trello or whatever else that you might use. I'm talking about the things you can use in those spaces that are free, usable mechanisms for people to arrive at decisions. And the first one of those you're probably very familiar with, but it's a SWOT diagram. But a SWOT diagram in a virtual meeting can allow everybody to contribute to their thoughts of the strengths, the weaknesses, what their ideas are for the way things could be different, and what they see as the risks that are ahead of them. And so you can develop collective ownership very, very fast rather than have that presented to people. Six Thinking Hats takes things a stage further. It enables you, when you're facing a problem, to separate facts from opinions and make sure that people have much better ideas, and you can stick those things down there and look at the creative elements within it. But once again, rather than just sitting around a table, everybody can contribute post-it notes to it in the same way you have. The Kipling list helps you take that forward and plan it out in more detail. It comes from Kipling's poem, I had 6 serving men, they taught me all I knew. Their names were who and what and why, and what and when and how, and why and where and who. I think that was 9 of them, actually. But those things, they call them the 5 W's and an H. And the newspaper people use them to really get to the bottom of the story. And they're a very useful tool with a group of people to think about what exactly is happening and what you want to happen. Then you've got an affinity diagram, which is the sort of thing we were doing before. But it's amazing how you can pull ideas together and how people who contribute their own ideas into this space can see them merge to form bigger ideas. And that when the conclusion is reached, they can see their part in the ownership of what emerges. And they're much more enthused and bought in to taking it forward. And this diagram, the impact and ease grid, where you can actually position the ideas depending on the impact they have and how easy they'd be to implement. And of course, these would be your priority things to progress, but everybody's had a view within that. The planning chart, where you can lay things out on a timeline and get agreement for whether that's all going to fit together and seeing the dependencies. And the meeting review or the project review or whatever else review, where you can get people to put down their own thoughts about what went well and where there's room for improvement, and build ownership for people taking that forward. So those various tools can really help participation within a meeting and a much better outcome of the meeting. But that's just 7 of them. There's a link here to a version of the concept board that has about 30 different tools on it, plus a selection matrix in here so that you can select them for any part of the meeting. Please don't click on it at the moment. I promise to take you to a page that has a link to all of these things, and then you can just copy and paste them into your meetings and use them as you wish. And around that, there is also this resource called the Meeting Tool Chest. And the Meeting Tool Chest has all of these resources and ideas in there, all freely available to you. So whatever you've seen me use here and the way I've done it, you'll find it within the Meeting Tool Chest, and you can just download it and use it yourselves within there. Of course, sometimes it helps to have facilitation skills around all of this to actually move that forward. But the tools themselves are all freely available. And what I'd like to ask you is the 7 tools that I ran through there in terms of getting people to think up ideas, to understand the problem, to look at the strengths. Can I ask you, along this number line where I've got 0 to 7, could you place your cursor to reflect how many of those 7 tools listed on the left you've used in a meeting in the last year? Now, that's not too bad, actually, but there's an opportunity in every meeting to use at least one of these tools. And so perhaps I'd encourage you to have a look at them and try and just incorporate them in more of your meetings to get that participation going. Because anything is up, really, from there. So I thought you'd have a 6 there, Bill. Bill's very much into his tools, so I think that. I want to now move you off of that activity side, which is how we do our thinking, to the relationships we have between each other when we do that. And this is the attention element in it. And you remember we talked about the chemistry at the start in the assembly side of things and getting people with the right mindset at the start. Actually, it's easy to spoil that. So Otto Scharmer, who's done quite a lot of work on this, likens people's attitudes to the state of their head, their heart, and their hands. And that in many meetings, you find that people approach the meeting with a sense of judgment. So we tend to evaluate everything that's brought to us from a position of either that's right or wrong, or I believe it or I don't believe it. We can approach people in terms of their views with a cynicism about their motivation. And sometimes within our hands, we tend to play it safe. We don't like doing anything too adventurous, a bit of covering our backsides, as it were. CYA is the American term for it. Whereas actually, if you have a meeting where people are more open than that, where actually when something doesn't tally with your understanding, it breeds curiosity in you to understand how the person sees it that way and whether that new perspective has anything to offer you. Where when people say things or their position, you start off with a point of view of empathy and compassion. And that leads to a sense of adventure, to trying new things together. And when we look at somebody's using coloured markers on the screen, never mind. When you actually start with that side of things, the interesting thing is that you could start off with a meeting where everybody's green, and it only takes one person to go red, and it tends to turn the rest of the meeting the same way. And the reason is that while our behaviors to others are affecting their feelings about the enthusiasm with which they're doing it, and that leads to their behaviors to us to be encouraging and supportive and curious so that we feel good about what we're doing. As soon as somebody's behaviors to us change to being judgmental or threatening or challenging in some way, shape, or form, it throws us on the defensive, and we start worrying about how that appears, and we begin to move away from curiosity to almost a form of mental defense. And so our behavior to others then tends to be more closed, and we move out to this red ring very, very easily. But you can see here in terms of what happens within the meeting that if we're all red, it tends to be that our capacity for seeing new things is very much diminished. We're looking through filters of habit. Whereas what we really want is people constantly sensing new meaning and new opportunity within it. And so getting people to monitor where they are on this scale from red to green is really quite a useful thing to do. And sensing whether the meeting's shifting from green to red, have somebody name it, and then just say, look, can we all just pause for a moment or two and get our thinking back onto the green side? And somebody cycled this thing on this scale from red to green, where about would most meetings typically fall. Have a go with your cursors and place it along this closed and open line in terms of your experience of meetings and where they fall from closed to open. That's not bad. Clearly some things there to move more to open, but that's pretty good going. So yeah, by the way, if you've got the post-it note selected, when you click in a space, it will drop one in there. Okay, so that's one side of it. What I'd like you to think about now is this is a force field diagram. So this force field diagram is a really useful way of thinking about other people's response to situations. And I'd like you to think about the sorts of things in meetings that drive you to being closed and judgmental and cynical about what's going on, and the sorts of things in meetings that lead you to be curious and have empathy for those things that are going on. Just fill in some post-it notes and drop them in here. It'll be useful to see other people's ideas, and we'll make it all available to you later on. I'm going to take off moderation so you can zoom in and see what you want to see there on the screen. Try and find a space where nobody else has got a post-it note yet. And when you've put something, click off it and go further to the right. Thanks, Torsten. Love the shadow. And music can be really quite effective in these things as well, and we can do it in virtual meetings too. Okay, some good thoughts there. So I'm going to, I want to talk to you a bit about ground rules. So ground rules are a good way of setting an expectation within a group, within a meeting, for the way that that meeting will behave, trying to veer more on the behaviors that make people green in their thinking, more open in their thinking, and moving away from the behaviors that make them more closed. And I've highlighted the one for attention for this. And once again, this set of ground rules is available on the links that I'll take you to later. But if I focus on attention, the ground rule, we will listen and lead at a level which encourages freedom of expression and mutual support. Actually getting some sort of contract with the people in the room about how you'll behave enables the other people within the meeting to call out behaviors that don't fit in with that, and helps you to be able to set the expectations of people. And they can be really powerful in creating the right culture in a meeting. So I wanted to ask you the question on the left here, which is, in terms of ground rules, do you use ground rules in your meetings? So the ground rules that are there, sorry, I just need to moderate again. So with those ground rules, do you use ground rules in your meetings? Quite a lot of you do. That's good. For those of you who don't, it's a tremendously easy win in terms of setting people's expectations of what to set from there. So that's attention. Before I go on to actions, I just want to scroll out for a bit and recover where we've got to. So we started off with the ideas about how you get people into the meeting and how you set the scene for the meeting to give them the best sort of chemistry and situation and opportunity to participate effectively. We then moved on to alignment to talk a bit about the goal for what an effective meeting is and how getting buy-in to how they're going to get the benefit out of that meeting gives them more ownership of it. And then we spent a chunk of time looking at activity and the sheer range of things that are available to us if only we're willing to move our paradigm on from the idea that a meeting's a group of people sat around a table. So then we went on to this idea of attention and looking at how how each other's behavior in the meeting can throw us off in terms of constructive creative participation, and what factors would help us to keep that better in balance, and the role of ground rules in that. And the next bit that I want to focus on is that all of this is only really of value if it leads to something concrete happening at the end. If the meeting doesn't deliver that, then it's been of limited value. And a couple of things that there. The first thing I'd say is the number of times I've facilitated meetings and taken it all the way to actions, and then gone back to people and found that they haven't created them as tasks in their calendar and they haven't created them as time blocks in their calendar. And yet they're still expecting those actions to be done without actually planning the time in their schedule to make them happen. So one of the things that it's a really useful thing to do is to make time at the end of the meeting for people to put them in their calendars and their schedules. And I found that really does make a big difference in terms of people being able to contribute those. But the second area I'd like to fit up on is this idea of whether you'd bet your own money on making it happen. And this came from some research that was done of people by McKinsey, must be about 15 years ago now, but that research done by McKinsey actually asked the question of projects that have failed. So they wanted to understand why projects failed. And they went back to took people back to the start of the project and said, when you commissioned this project, when you actually kicked it off, would you have bet $500 of your own money that the project would have been a success? And in almost every case, they found that people would not have bet $500 of their own money on it being a success. And that's fascinating because it means at their core, people understood that this was going to fail even before they embarked on the project. But they hadn't registered it consciously. The thing about being willing to bet $500 of your own money is it taps in to not the conscious part of your brain, but the subconscious, the heart and the emotions that you have. And when you actually think to yourself, well, no, I wouldn't bet $500 of my own money, that's an excellent clue to ask the question, well, what would need to be different for you to bet $500 of your own money? Because if you can identify what would be necessary to be different to bet that $500, you can actually get it fixed at the start of the project rather than have the project fail at the end. And so that's a really good question when people have defined actions. Ask them, would you bet $500 of your own money on making this happen? And part of that links to commitment. I mean, I talked about whether people have put it into their calendars or not. But the other aspect of that is, what do we mean by commitment? And I've created a scale of commitment here to give people a chance to think through what that level might be. So what I'd like you to do is, if you were thinking about your team of people, and what level of commitment they would need for you to bet $500 of your own money on the actions being completed for the next meeting, where would they have to be on that scale for you to be confident that your money would be safe? Just move your cursor over the... Okay, definitely down towards that bottom end. That's good. So what I'd now like to ask you in that context is, in terms of your experience of meeting actions being completed on time, place your cursor along this number line based on your average experience of meeting actions being completed on time in terms of the performance of the meetings you attend. Okay, that's not bad. That's certainly better than this morning. But the interesting thing is that actually, if you're around 50% to 75% in completion of actions for meetings, do you realize it means you either have 30% more meetings or double the number of meetings than you would necessarily need if you could get that percentage up to 100%? Now, 30% more meetings or 100% more meetings is a lot of time spent in meetings that are called to progress actions that should have been done for the previous meeting. And that's what tends to clog up our calendars and our diaries an awful lot of the time. So go back to think about this actions, the $500 bet, and where people need to be on commitment in order to try and shape this up a bit and make sure that the participation here is such that the ownership of those actions means that they're much more likely to be delivered. And the final area that I'd like to pick up on is the area of assessment. And assessment is about understanding and learning, both as an individual and as an organization, about where to improve on that. I've got two questions. I'd like you to do the first one first, the one at the top, which is, how many meeting improvement ideas and initiatives have you been exposed to in the last 10 years? So quite a lot of them, really. And the next question I want to ask you is, over the last 10 years, how much more effective have meetings become in general for you? That's not bad. That, once again, is some improvement. The interesting thing is, in the last 10 years, most business processes have improved much more than plus 25% on their performance. And the reason for that is that the one key thing that business processes need for improvement is data. There is no business process that's been sustainably improved without data. And yet we have very little data on the effectiveness of meetings, very little scoring of that. So the reason for this is that I wanted to think about how we actually manage meetings, because meetings are going to become more important, not less important in the future. And this is based on a whole load of consultants at the moment that are looking at the future of work. If you search the future of work on the web, you'll find that people are talking about the whole automation of anything to do with routine, that it goes into bots, that it goes into AI, that it goes into other mechanisms, and people get left with the things that are not routine, i.e. the things that are continuously changing. And this leads to increasing levels of disruptive change and what people refer to as a VUCA future: volatile, uncertain, complex. And that means that if we're not changing, the people we're dealing with are changing. And so all of our relationships and what we deliver through those relationships will be fast evolving, because there's constant change going on. And that means we're constantly having to learn about how to change what we deliver and what we expect from the people that we relate to. And the key mechanism for us to maintain those relationships, to work together to look at solutions to disruptive change, and to do that learning, is going to be remote meetings. Because that learning isn't something we'll get through books or training programs, it's something we'll have to learn on the job. And so the meetings themselves are going to become the crucial competitive element to staying ahead of the competition as we move towards this world of continuous change. And that means that it's more important for organizations to think about how those meetings are generating creativity and insight, how those meetings are reflecting the culture of the organization and the brand of the organization in terms of how they operate and create a character out of them, and how the meta strategy, how we lift people up to look back down on the problem, is working all the time from that. And so they need to understand how meetings are delivering those things. And so we need the data coming back from meeting. Now, there's a number of tools you can use to gather meeting feedback at an individual way. And the one I've illustrated here is actually an online app that enables you to just click faces to see what value you've got out of the meeting, to enable other people in those relationships to understand how well they're meeting your needs at that point in time, and also break it down into the 6 areas or the 5 areas that we've just covered leading up to assessment. But the other thing is how this works as an organization. And what I'd like to introduce you to here is the idea of a maturity model, because people don't respond very well to being told this is excellence. They much prefer to choose what excellence is for themselves, so they have ownership of it. In fact, the whole of this training has been about how you give people their own choice to contribute, so they have ownership of it. That's the whole thing, and this is no exception. But a maturity model gives people a chance to look at the descriptions in each row and say, where would we like to be as an organization in terms of how we work? You know, would it be here and here and here? So people can make their own choices and debate the right choice for them. And then they can say, well, where are we at the moment? What's the attitude we most often see in the meetings that we hold? And how far back from where we want to be is that? And then, of course, the descriptions in between help you define what you need to do differently to move the whole organization to an improved meeting culture. Now, I've said this is the simplified one. There is online, once again, free through the links I'll show you, a much more complicated one. But it's good to start with a simple one until people get used to it. There's nothing then, they're compatible, so there's nothing then to stop you introducing the more complex one once people have got used to the idea of the simple maturity model. But the idea that they're working out for themselves where they want to be different is once again a powerful step in gaining the movement that you want. So I want to ask you the question in terms of this side of things. Once again, a yes/no answer. Would this sort of maturity model be helpful in your organization in helping you move forward? Quite a few yeses on that. Well, as I said, it's freely available, so feel free to use it. And I'll show you where now, because I think we've finished the main part of the 6A's. So that's what we've covered. We've been through assembly, gathering people together, alignment, making sure they're focused on the same thing, activity in terms of how we create participative tools within a meeting, attention in terms of how we create a culture in which people support each other within that, and actions in terms of the delivery and assessment. All of that, all of the links that I promised you in this are available on this web page. And the link to this web page is down here. So what I would ask you to do, it'll open a new tab for you, so you don't need to worry about you losing this meeting. If you click the link here, it will open this page for you in your browser, and all of the links that we've talked about are available in there, and you are welcome to use it. And it would bless my heart if you do, because my key goal in all of this is just to make meetings better, because I think if meetings are better, people will be more fulfilled, and if they're more fulfilled, they'll have much richer lives and much more enjoyable lives. So that's the key focus for me in this. So click there and don't leave us yet, because we've got about 3 minutes to go, and what I'd like from you is a sense as to whether this has met your needs or not. So I've created a number line here. To what extent did this meet your hopes for this session? I've created a number line 0 to 100, but I put greater than 100 if anybody thinks they got more out of it than they were hoping. That looks very good. Thank you. Very good. Now, if you'd like to give some more feedback to it, if you've got a QR code reader on your phone, you can read that QR code and give me feedback via Inspirometer, which is the meeting tool I showed you earlier. But apart from that, if you wouldn't mind just grabbing some Post-it notes from up here and put down the things that blessed you, what you think went well in this session, and also here the room for improvement, so I can learn about how to improve this for future sessions. And if you've got any questions, you can either hang about afterwards, or you can email me, mike.clargo@culturistics.com, and I'll do my best to answer them. I'll take off moderation as well.
All right, so as long as everyone is typing here, I take the time to thank you very much for this amazing session, Mike. It was really enlightening, really inspiring, and I'm so thankful that you did this for us today. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you. And as I say, if you've got any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and throw it into the ring. Yeah, quite a few people had the cursor issue there. Just a point on that, actually, if you've got a meeting that's fewer than about 25 people, you know, sort of like more like 12, etc., and so forth, then actually the cursors are not going to be such an issue. But as Simona said, you can turn them off and just turn them on when you need them for people to engage in the exercises. So thank you for that. We'll do that. Okay, feel free to ask any questions you wish, or apart from that, as I said, the email address is down there, so you're welcome to use the email to contact me with any questions you have. But I really hope that you use the resources I've dumped there, that in some ways I've stretched your thinking about what you might do in your meetings, just to adopt one or two of these ideas and do something different with them. And thank you very much indeed for your time.